The sky above Thrima 7 shimmered with glacial winds and lavender auroras, dancing across the frozen peaks like living streamers. Beneath that ethereal glow, a procession of cadets made their way through the icy gorge. It was the last day of the Galactic Cadet Survival Program's winter module, and most of the students, recruits from 13 different planetary systems, believed this would be just another routine drill. Snow crunched under boots, claws, suction pads, and hooves. No one suspected what was about to come. Among them walked Aiden Reyes, the only human in the cohort. His breath came in steady plumes as he adjusted the straps of his cold-weather gear. Though the standard-issue suit distributed by the Academy was rated for extreme cold, he could feel the bite of the wind sneaking through the seams. His instructors hadn't spoken a word all morning, merely leading the group forward through narrowing canyons of ice. He noticed the slope was steepening, and the light was fading as cliffs rose on either side. The lead instructor, a stone-skinned Threx named Vorkul, stopped without warning and raised his thick arm. The group halted. "Cadets," Vorkul rumbled, "you are now standing above the veiled hollow. Proceed carefully. You have 5 minutes to observe the terrain. Then we move out." Most cadets scattered slightly, peering into the bowl-shaped depression ahead, some taking scans, others poking the snow with sensors or tail whips. Aiden crouched and tapped the ice, listening for hollowness. Something felt off. The crust underfoot sounded thin, not fragile, but not entirely solid either. While the others were distracted, a strange hum filled the air. Aiden's pulse quickened. He rose and looked at the instructors, but they stood still, faces unreadable. Suddenly, the ground beneath him buckled with a sickening crack. He had just enough time to shout before the ice gave way. With a thunderous roar, the entire group plunged downward into darkness. Aiden fell for what felt like seconds, but might have been less than one. His body slammed against a sloped chute of packed snow that slowed his fall before dumping him unceremoniously onto a jagged ice floor. All around him, bodies landed, tumbled, and skidded to a stop. The cavern was massive, wide enough to hold a stadium, with crystalline walls glowing faintly from embedded bioluminescent organisms. Shards of fractured snow glistened in the dim light, and the silence that followed the collapse was eerie. Cadet Mobran, a serpentine Glavan, hissed loudly. "Was this planned?" she spat, uncoiling her long form from a pile of frost. "No communication uplink," muttered Yorl, a thick-set Suln with obsidian-colored fur. He tapped his wrist panel, but the screen blinked red. Vorkul and the other instructors were nowhere to be seen. There was no sign of an exit, no obvious passage, no ladder or rope. Only smooth walls of ice that curved upward into blackness. Panic began to stir. Aiden stood and checked himself for injuries. A bruised shoulder, scratches along his thigh. Nothing major. Around him, the others had started to realize the same truth. They were alone. The simulation had begun, and this was no minor drill. "This is entrapment," barked Zephyl, a lizard-like cadet from Daxora. His voice echoed harshly against the walls. "We could suffocate down here." "The air is circulating," said Aiden quietly, noticing the soft draft curling around his ankles. "There's a vent system or natural airflow from somewhere. That means there's a way out, or at least an opening." Zephyl scoffed and turned away, but others were listening now. Even Cadet Rylix, a feathered being from Quori Prime, flicked her head toward Aiden. He hadn't spoken much during the program. Most of the alien cadets dismissed him as fragile, too dependent on machines and emotion. Yet now, in this moment of crisis, his calmness drew attention. A shriek rang out. One of the cadets, a translucent-bodied species from Palax, had slipped on a patch of ice and cracked her limb. It wasn't broken, but the shock sent more ripples of fear through the group. Some began shouting, others pacing. 2 reptilian species tried climbing the wall using claws, but the ice was too slick. Laser cutters from wrist gear were tested and failed. The energy simply dissipated into the ice, absorbed as if the glacier was alive and feeding on it. By the second hour, the temperature dropped further. Frost formed on uniforms. The light dimmed as the bioglow faded. Some cadets began to argue about food, about shelter, about whose fault this was. Aiden walked away from the center of the cavern and examined the perimeter. The wall behind a cluster of crystals caught his eye. There was a faint indentation in the curve, barely noticeable, and the airflow seemed to come from that direction. He crouched and pressed his gloved hand to the ice. The surface felt more porous. He picked up a shard of rock and knocked gently. A hollow echo responded. That was it. A thinned section, maybe a tunnel behind it. But it was at least 3 meters thick. He couldn't just punch through. He would need heat. Controlled, sustained heat. Behind him, the group had split into clusters. Some were meditating, some arguing still. One was trying to construct a makeshift tent using outer coats. No one looked toward Aiden. That suited him fine. He pulled his pack closer and began inventorying its contents. Basic field tools, emergency ration tubes, a folded thermal blanket, a cracked metal dish from the fallen gear of another cadet. It wasn't much, but it could be enough. As he sat, staring into the shallow indentation in the wall, an idea began to form. Not something from military training, but from his childhood. He remembered his grandfather, a wilderness survivalist, teaching him how to make a heat lamp from seal fat and snow while camping in the Arctic Circle back on Earth. It was rudimentary, dirty, but it worked. Here, in this alien ice cave, he would try something similar. Aiden looked around once more at the group. None of them were building. None were thinking like engineers or scavengers. They were trained for war, yes, but not for desperation. He clenched his jaw and whispered under his breath, "Let's see if ancient Earth can beat advanced tech." Then he pulled the broken dish to his side and began to plan. The cold began to change. It was no longer just an environmental condition. It became a presence, creeping over skin, whispering into bones, and wrapping its fingers around muscle and thought. Most of the cadets sat huddled in groups now, backs pressed to the icy walls, their varied physiologies reacting in different, often unpredictable ways. Aiden noticed it first in the silence, how the talking had diminished, how the arguments had dissolved into murmurs and occasional muttering. Fear had evolved into something quieter, something heavier. Aiden remained focused. He had chosen a corner of the cavern near the indentation where he felt a soft airflow, the one place that hinted at possibility. He dragged a split ration bag beside him and began rummaging through it. The alien nutritional paste was unfamiliar to him, but when he squeezed it onto a piece of metal, he noticed it was oily. That was good. He remembered his grandfather saying, "Anything that leaves a greasy mark on snow can burn." He added that to the mental list forming in his mind. He stood and walked slowly across the cavern, scanning the floor for fragments, metal, cloth, bone, or plastic. After the fall, scattered gear had mixed with chunks of fractured ice and shards of cadet armor. No one had organized supplies. No one had tried. Jorl, the Soln with obsidian fur, sat nearby, arms around his knees. His eyes were dull. His thick fur had begun to freeze along the tips. When Aiden approached, he didn't speak. "Do you have anything flammable?" Aiden asked. Jorl didn't look at him. "What would that do?" Aiden knelt beside him. "Do you have anything that burns? Rags, oils, paper?" Jorl exhaled slowly and reached into a pouch. He pulled out a strip of thermal wrapping, insulated fabric designed to retain heat. "I used it to line my gloves." Aiden took it with a nod. "This will help. Stay warm." He returned to his corner and placed the wrapping inside the metal dish, now slightly bent to form a basin. Then he moved to the next step. He needed a wick. Snow wouldn't burn. But if he could use fibrous material, something that would hold flame even briefly, he could layer the heat source in stages. He spotted Rylix, the feathered cadet, sitting with her wings wrapped around her body. Her feathers were beginning to lose their luster. "Rylix," he said gently. She didn't answer. "I need something fibrous. Do you have feathers that have fallen out?" Her eyes flicked open. She blinked slowly. Then, wordlessly, she reached beneath her and pulled a handful of molted feathers from under her belt. "Take them," she whispered. "I'm not going to fly out of here anyway." He took them without hesitation and returned to his station. He wrapped the feathers inside the thermal cloth and dripped more of the oily paste over the bundle. His hands moved quickly now. He felt a sense of urgency building, not panic, but purpose. He wasn't just building heat, he was building hope. The lighter in his standard field kit was nearly depleted. He had to make this first ignition count. He checked the igniter, took a slow breath, and struck the spark. The flame sputtered, caught on the tip of the paste-soaked feather, and flickered low. He shielded it with both hands, letting his body block the wind that drifted through the tiny crevices in the ice. The fire grew. Not much, but enough. The warmth radiated just enough to melt a thin line of frost from the inner wall of his basin. He built a frame using slivers of broken gear and shaped a dome with shards of ice and debris to trap the heat. It was crude, ugly, but it worked. He leaned back and exhaled. The tiny furnace glowed, casting faint orange light against the blue of the cavern. It was small, but it was alive. A shuffle of movement behind him made him turn. Mo Bran, the serpentine Glavan cadet, had slithered toward him. Her scales had dulled to a murky green, and her tongue flicked weakly. "What is that?" she asked. "A start," he said. "If I can get a few more of these going, we'll have enough heat to stay conscious. Maybe enough to melt a tunnel through the ice." She studied the flame, mesmerized. "The others, they've given up." "Not all of them," he replied. "Not yet." She hesitated. Then slowly, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a vial. "This is digestive oil from my emergency pack. We use it to coat food when our inner temperature drops. Highly flammable." He took it with a nod. "Thank you." He built a second furnace, smaller this time, but more focused. He used a broken piece of a communication panel as a reflective surface to focus the flame toward the thinned section of the wall he'd marked earlier. The snow hissed and wept as the heat made contact. It wasn't fast, but it was working. The others began to notice. One by one, cadets crawled closer to the dim firelight. No one spoke. No one interfered. But they watched. Even Zephyl, the arrogant Daxaran, stood at a distance with narrowed eyes, arms crossed over his armored chest. He didn't help, but he didn't mock either. Aiden didn't need their praise. He just needed more material, more fuel. He approached Cadet Enro, a silent, mask-wearing being whose physiology had prevented most communication during the program. But Enro nodded when Aiden pointed at the rubbery bindings on his pack. With one precise movement, Enro sliced off the strap and handed it to him. That would burn well. Hours passed. The cavern grew darker except for the pulsing glow of the makeshift furnaces. Aiden worked without pause, moving between fire sources, adjusting airflow with slabs of stone, repositioning heat to attack the thinnest section of ice. His hands burned from the cold and the heat both. His breath fogged constantly, soaking his scarf and freezing it against his neck. But he kept working. Then came the sound, soft at first, like water dripping. He leaned closer. The ice near the marked wall had begun to melt. A small rivulet ran down the surface. He pressed a gloved hand to it and felt a patch of softness, wetness beneath his fingers. He gritted his teeth and added more fuel to the basin. Behind him, Rylix stirred and spoke quietly. "Why do you do this alone?" He didn't turn to her. "Because I have the hands to do it, and because no one else started." She nodded and sat beside him. "Then I will hold the fire." Mobran joined, followed by Jorl, who dragged a broken crate of tangled wires to the side. One by one, the cadets began to contribute, not with confidence, not with belief, but because action felt better than despair. Even if this was madness, even if escape was impossible, the furnace gave them something that had vanished since the fall: direction. Aiden sat back on his heels and let the heat touch his face for a moment. He watched the tunnel slowly beginning to form. Ice retreated. The surface cracked and hissed. Steam rose and coiled toward the ceiling. A way out was forming, not fast, not clean, but real. His mind calculated time, depth, energy, and breath. He didn't know if the instructors were watching. He didn't care. This wasn't about points. It was about being human in the oldest sense, building something out of nothing, surviving with whatever the universe left behind. The next phase would be harder, tunneling without tools, avoiding collapse, maintaining heat. But now he wasn't alone. He had fire. He had motion. And most importantly, he had momentum. The cold could no longer stop him. Aiden's hands trembled as he rubbed warmth back into his fingers, squatting beside the flickering furnace. The melting had begun in earnest now, but so had the resistance. The ice wasn't smooth. It was layered, ancient, dense with minerals and frozen sediment. The outermost wall had yielded under heat, but the next section fought back with stubbornness that almost felt alive. Still, the small rivulet of water trickling from the wall was enough to keep him going. He glanced up at the others gathered nearby. Rylix was watching the flame with a strange calm, while Mobran had begun forming coils of wire into a loose frame, hoping to reflect heat more efficiently. No one spoke unless necessary. It was a pact of silence, of effort. He stood, stretched his legs, and stared at the growing tunnel. It wasn't wide, just a handspan in diameter, but it was a beginning. The heat needed to be sustained and directed. That was the challenge. Without proper airflow, the warmth diffused and lost effectiveness. He'd already noticed the ice above the tunnel dripping slower than the base, which meant the fire's energy wasn't being focused enough. He needed a chimney effect, a way to channel heat upward while keeping the temperature intense at the melting point. His gaze wandered toward the pile of broken crates and scraps the cadets had dragged together. From within the debris, he found two halves of a metallic food container and a narrow pipe from a hydration system. He held them up, visualizing an enclosure, a dome that could trap heat and funnel it through the tunnel's mouth like a thermal arrow. That was it. That was the answer. Aiden motioned for Jorl, whose strength had proven useful. "I need this pipe bent into an arc," he said, holding it between both hands. "Like this." Jorl nodded, took the pipe, and pressed it against his thick thigh. With a grunt, he flexed the metal carefully, shaping it inch by inch. Aiden used the two container halves to construct a crude shell, then secured them with thawed plastic strands melted and hardened like glue. Mobran provided more digestive oil, pouring it into a rag bundle that Aiden placed beneath the dome. He wedged the tunnel's entry point into the center of the enclosure and lit the flame again. This time, the result was immediate. The flame intensified, heat locked within the shell, and steam rose in rhythmic bursts. The ice crackled and hissed, giving way in uneven chunks. Water pooled below, soaking into the stone floor, creating small puddles that shimmered under the glow. Rylix stepped closer. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's progress," Aiden answered, voice hoarse. He hadn't rested properly in hours. His body screamed for sleep, but his mind remained sharp. The tunnel was working, but it wasn't big enough. Not yet. Not for escape. "We need to widen it," he said aloud, more to himself than to the group. "I need tools, scrapers, picks, anything." Enro, silent as always, rose from his corner and walked to the crate pile. He returned with a triangular shard of crystal and a fractured piece of alloy. Aiden took the crystal and ran it along the tunnel's edge. It shaved slivers of ice away like a knife. It was perfect. He crouched and worked in intervals, scraping, melting, watching, and repeating. The furnace heated the wall. He scraped what the flame loosened. It was slow, but with every pass, the tunnel grew deeper, wider. As he worked, more cadets approached. They didn't interrupt. Instead, each brought something: materials, cloth, oils, broken tools. Some sat and watched, others scavenged in silence. It wasn't cooperation, not in the formal sense, but something more primal. Shared survival. No leader, no orders, just the instinct to contribute to the one solution that showed promise. Zephyl stood near the edge, arms crossed, jaw tight. He watched Aiden work, then spoke. "This won't get us out in time." Aiden didn't stop scraping. "No other options working." Zephyl sneered. "Maybe not yet, but I can break through if I find a fault line." "Then go find one," Aiden said, steady. "If you do, I'll help you dig it. But until then, this is what we have." Zephyl didn't reply. He turned and walked into the darker parts of the cavern, muttering something in his native tongue. Aiden didn't care. He had his focus. By the next hour, the tunnel had reached nearly 2 meters in depth. The heat continued to work, though slower now. The deeper he went, the more compacted the ice became. Minerals laced through it like veins of stone, and water cooled quickly as it ran back down the walls. To keep the temperature up, Aiden rotated the furnace. He placed the shell higher on a makeshift frame, tilted it toward the interior of the tunnel, and doubled the fuel soaked into the cloth bundles. Then the flickering began. The flame sputtered, dimmed, and reignited weakly. "No," he muttered. He checked the oil. Nearly gone. Mobran moved to his side. "We're low." "I know." Jorl returned from a search through the debris with a small container. "Thermal gel," he said. "Not designed for fire, but it burns." Aiden uncapped the gel and sniffed it. Chemical, sharp, flammable. He poured a line across the cloth, lit it, and watched as blue flames surged inside the dome. The ice flinched again. Crackles echoed inside the tunnel. "Keep rotating the fuel," Aiden instructed. "We can't let the heat drop for even a second." As Rylix and Jorl took turns maintaining the fire, Aiden climbed halfway into the tunnel. He scraped methodically, pulling chunks of ice back through his knees and tossing them behind. He could feel the change now, airflow increasing. A subtle shift in pressure told him he was approaching a cavity or exit. He stopped and whispered, "Almost." Then came the thud, not from inside the tunnel but from above. A distant, dull sound. Aiden froze. Then he scrambled out and looked up. Silence again. He turned to Mobran. "Did you hear that?" She nodded. "Something shifted. Above us." He moved back into the tunnel and placed his ear against the inner ice wall. This time he heard it clearly. Wind. Not just airflow. Open-air wind, vibrating through the ice like a distant whisper. He backed out and stood tall, eyes wide. "We're close," he said. "Really close." The cadets gathered around. Rylix smiled faintly. Jorl exhaled in relief. Even Enro tilted his head, a gesture of acknowledgement. Aiden stepped back toward the tunnel, exhausted but alive with purpose. "Let's widen it," he said. 1 meter more, then we crawl." And they began. The breath of the cavern felt different now, warmer, more urgent, almost rhythmic. The heat that once seemed a fragile flicker had become a pulse, a beating heart at the center of desperate survival. Aiden knelt inside the deepening tunnel, knees soaked through from melted water, elbows scraped raw from dragging his weight forward. Every scrape of the crystal blade against the inner wall made his muscles scream, but he didn't stop. The wind behind the ice was real. He heard it again, stronger now, carrying not only air but life, space, freedom, and sky beyond. Behind him, Mobran monitored the furnace dome. She rotated it at precise intervals, adjusting its angle so the flames licked deeper into the ice instead of escaping into the cavern. Jorl crouched behind her, melting strips of rubber and cloth to create new bindings, while Enro reinforced the dome's base with curved fragments of metal. Even Rylix, whose feathers were stiff with frost, pressed herself near the flame, catching drips of water with her canteen so they had something to drink. No one complained. No one questioned the plan anymore. The escape tunnel was no longer Aiden's idea. It belonged to all of them. He pulled back into the cavern for a moment, arms trembling, shoulders tight. "We're 2 meters from breakthrough," he said, voice rasping from dryness. "Maybe less." "There's a gap in the pressure. I can feel it." Jorel handed him a tube of rations without speaking. Aiden squeezed the contents into his mouth, thick, oily, bitter, and forced it down. Calories meant warmth. Warmth meant progress. He stood and moved toward the supplies they had salvaged. He needed one more heat shell, something to intensify the tunnel's inner push. Zephyl returned from his perimeter search at that moment. His armor was scorched along one side, and a large crack split across the front. He approached without his usual arrogance and dropped a dented thermal battery onto the ground in front of Aiden. "Found it buried in a crate," Zephyl said, voice flat. "Not much charge left. Might be enough to boil air for an hour." Aiden nodded. "That'll do." He took the battery, rigged it to the last functioning plate of reflective metal, and used wire soaked in Mobrand's remaining digestive oil to build a spiral-shaped coil beneath the heat dome. With the gel ignited and the battery pushing radiant warmth into the shell, the interior temperature spiked. Steam burst from the tunnel like a hiss of anger. The cadets sprang to their feet. "Move fast," Aiden ordered. "If the pressure's shifting, we might not have long." He crawled into the tunnel again. This time the air was unmistakably different. His face flushed from the heat. Beads of sweat rolled down his spine even as his knees numbed from contact with the melting floor. The sound beyond the wall became a deep roar, wind whistling through an open crevice just meters ahead. He raised the crystal blade and began to carve with renewed speed. Chunks of blue-white ice fell away, tumbling down the slope behind him. His arms burned, his back throbbed. The confined space grew hotter with each passing second, steam blurring his vision. But then, in one sudden crack, the wall before him splintered. A burst of cold air exploded into his face, clean, wild, infinite. He dropped the tool and pressed both hands to the breach. The ice gave way. Aiden squirmed forward and shoved his shoulder through the gap. The tunnel opened into a vertical chute, a natural shaft filled with light, faint but pure. Above him, the shimmer of starlight filtered through a cracked ceiling of frost. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He backed out, breath heaving. "I found the exit," he shouted. "Vertical shaft, climbable. We need to widen it fast." Zephyl stepped forward without waiting. "I'll lead the climb. My claws will hold." Jorel followed, hoisting Mobrand toward the tunnel. Rylix helped Enro gather remaining supplies into cloth wraps. Aiden returned to the mouth and began carving again, clearing the sides to allow wider passage. The cadets took turns, each dragging another into the tunnel, each holding light, each adjusting the furnace angle one last time. One by one, they entered the narrow corridor. Inside the tunnel, Zephyl began the ascent. His claws dug into the softened ice walls, finding purchase in pockets of melted frost. He disappeared into the shaft above. Then Jorel climbed, using strength and bulk to push the walls wider as he went. Rylix flew in short bursts, catching handholds. Mobrand slithered behind her, gliding across the slick tunnel surface. Enro, silent and fluid, followed next, moving with calm purpose. Aiden was last. He crouched beside the furnace, now flickering faintly. The fuel was gone. The dome cracked in the center. The thermal battery clicked as its charge died. He touched the metal shell with one gloved hand. "Thank you," he whispered. Then he turned, crawled into the tunnel, and began his ascent. His muscles fought him with every motion. His legs ached, his fingers cramped. But above him he saw light, not artificial, real light, moonlight reflecting off snow. He reached for it. The walls groaned. Melting had destabilized the edges of the shaft. A chunk of ice above him broke loose, crashing just inches from his back. He accelerated, ignoring the scream in his chest. His hands found a jagged ridge. He pulled, and then he was out. He burst onto the surface of Thryma 7, collapsed onto crusted snow, and stared up into the lavender sky. The auroras still danced, slow and uncaring, as if the world had never changed. The cadets stood around him, silent. Each was wrapped in frost, streaked with steam, eyes wide with exhaustion. But they were alive. Behind them, the shaft steamed gently, the tunnel melting wider in the moonlight, a scar in the ice, proof of what they had done. No one spoke for a long time. Then Rylak stepped forward and extended her hand. Aiden took it and rose. "You melted a path through a glacier," she said quietly. "No," he said. "We did." From behind them came the sound of landing engines, shuttles descending. The instructors were arriving. Aiden looked at the others. He had no idea what explanation they would give, what grades would be assigned, or what debates would follow. But none of that mattered. They had escaped the impossible, and he had shown the galaxy exactly what a human could do, with fire, scraps, and determination. Aiden stood in the command tent with his back straight, shoulders aching, hands bandaged from knuckle to wrist. The warmth inside the shelter made his face sting from the contrast, but he didn't move. Across from him stood Instructor Vorkul, massive as ever, his granite-like skin gleaming faintly under the tent's lights. Around the edges of the room stood the other instructors, Ambassador Talion of the Quori, Commander Arna from the Suln Fleet, and Chief Examiner Dovak of the Galactic Cadet Commission. Each held a datapad, though none glanced at it. All eyes remained fixed on him. No one spoke for a long time. Outside, the other cadets were being checked by medical teams. Rylak had suffered frostbite along one wing but insisted on staying with Mobran, who refused assistance until Enro was treated. Jorl had a cracked rib from the ascent, but grunted through every breath as if nothing had happened. Zephyl paced like a caged beast near the cliff's edge, not because of agitation, but to stay warm and alert. None of them had asked to be debriefed yet. All waited to see what would happen to Aiden first. Vorkul finally exhaled, the sound deep and resonant like tectonic pressure being released. "You violated standard procedure by initiating an unsanctioned structural burn through glacial material," he said. Aiden remained silent. "You repurposed Academy-issued supplies for unauthorized survival engineering." Still, Aiden said nothing. "You acted independently, without command approval, assuming control of cadet actions and diverting group attention from sanctioned escape protocols." The silence stretched. Then Vorkul's voice shifted. "And in doing so, you prevented 7 deaths, established a new field application for thermodynamic resource manipulation, and successfully executed a solo breach of reinforced ice strata without powered tools." Aiden blinked. Vorkul took one heavy step forward. "You did what no simulation prepared for. You anticipated environmental behavior, applied improvisational tactics, adapted to failing materials, and rallied an unstructured team into action. That is the definition of survival command." Ambassador Talion tapped her datapad lightly. "The footage we recovered shows your process from 6 separate thermal and visual sources. The Galactic Commission will study your furnace design in detail. We believe it may be integrated into future exploration kits, especially for primitive terrain scenarios." Dovak, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. His small eyes, sunken behind thick lenses, studied Aiden as though trying to peel apart the layers of his skull. "You are aware, Cadet Reyes, that your survival scenario was not intended to be solvable." Aiden nodded. "I suspected." Dovak's lip curled. "And yet you solved it. Alone." Aiden corrected him. "Not alone. I started it. The others finished it with me." Dovak looked down at his tablet and muttered something inaudible. Vorkul turned away and opened a side panel of the tent. Through it, the wide expanse of Thrima's glacial fields shimmered beneath the alien sky. The tunnel breach remained visible, smoking gently, already crusting over with new frost. A visible scar in the ice. A reminder. "You've changed the protocol," Vorkul said without looking back. "Whether the Commission approves it or not, this test will never be administered the same way again." Aiden looked at the instructors, unsure whether to speak. But when Talion gave him a slight nod, he asked, "What happens now?" Vorkul turned back to him. "You will be sent to the Capitol Dome on Darson 4. There you'll present your design and process before the Interstellar Combat Engineering Board. They've already requested your presence." Aiden swallowed. "I'm still a cadet." "Not anymore," Dovak interrupted. "You're being accelerated to field officer status, effective immediately." Aiden stood frozen. For a moment, his mind couldn't process the weight of it. Officer status. He'd come to the academy as a political gesture, a human token in a class of species believed to be superior in strength, biology, or intellect. He was there to observe, to represent, not to lead. Yet now, here he stood, on the verge of shaping galactic survival doctrine. "You'll receive a commendation," Vorkul added. "But more importantly, your name will be added to the Thryma ledger. Only 3 in the Academy's history have been added by action rather than appointment." Aiden almost laughed. "I didn't even have a weapon." "You had fire," Talion said, stepping forward, voice soft and sharp. "And fire is older than any weapon." Outside, the wind howled again, brushing over the tent and the edge of the cliff. Aiden looked toward the horizon. The auroras above danced slowly, casting waves of lavender and gold across the snowfields. Later, when he stepped out of the tent, he found the cadets waiting. Rylix gave him a tired smile. Mobran offered a nod. Jorl grunted something approving. Enro simply touched his own chest once and then lowered his hand, an alien sign of respect. Even Zephyl gave him a long look, nodded once, then turned to walk beside him. No one spoke of what had happened in the cave. No one had to. That night, when the cadets were flown back to orbit, the Academy's central server issued a system-wide update. A new line was added to the archived survival manual for glacial operations. "In environments where energy dissipates, heat is sacred. Let the human's furnace remind you, fire makes a tunnel when nothing else will." Aiden Reyes read the line from his bunk aboard the carrier. He stared at it for a long time, not because he needed validation, but because he understood now what it meant. The galaxy measured power in energy weapons, shields, technology, and psychic abilities. But real power, human power, was the capacity to endure, to invent, to lead in silence when panic ruled. No evolution, no species modification, no tactical implant could replace that. He lay back, staring at the ceiling of his bunk, the low hum of the ship's reactor beneath him. Fire was old. So was ice. But something even older lived in him now. A furnace that would never go out.